Lawyers, what is the most morally challenging case that you've worked on? I'm a lawyer now, but had a case while an extern at the Federal Public Defender's Office. Client lived in his brother's basement for years, during which time he repeatedly abused his nephew and filmed it and posted it online, glossing over lots of the details, but he got arrested by state authorities and the feds picked up the case. He was screwed. Feds haven't outright lost a case like this in almost 2 decades. I think bare minimum guideline range of 1,600 months, essentially a life sentence. We went to visit him and were the first contact he's had with lawyers since his arraignment. My supervisor thought this would be a good opportunity to throw me in the deep end to see how I would interact with the new client. He literally couldn't understand what he did wrong, explaining in great detail how his nephew was often asleep during the encounters so it wouldn't be a crime, also saying when he was awake he really enjoyed it, and a bunch of other gut-wrenching rationalizations. At the time I thought this was a terrible idea, but over time I see the wisdom in my boss doing that. I've never wanted more, to jump across a table and choke someone to death in my entire life, yet I had to remain completely composed and professional. He was one of the most despicable human beings I'd ever met in my life, yet our office was the only people on earth that were supposed to be on his side, advocating for and safeguarding his rights. It screws with your head. The experience has really stuck with me, even years later. Being dispassionate in your profession is something that is really, really difficult to master, especially when dealing with people like him. Compartmentalizing judgment and emotion doesn't come naturally to most people, and it takes years of dedicated practice. Nevertheless, I still find comfort in the fact that he's spending the rest of his life in living hell. Story 2. Please don't ask for specifics. Had a case where a guy shot and ended a security guard that slapped him across the face for selling drugs near a store. I knew the guy had done it. It was close to midnight. The crime scene had poor lighting and the shooter wore a hoodie. Only one eyewitness that showed up for the trial had told the police at the time of the crime that the suspect was black. The defendant wasn't Caucasian but wasn't black either. That, in my opinion, was the argument that won the jury over. Defendant found not guilty. He thanks me while in tears. His mother and grandmother bring me a cake and a thank you note afterwards. Less than a year later, I'm watching the news and they're reporting a crime where a crew held up 3 families hostage while robbing their apartments. They beat up the janitor very bad. They tied the families up and locked them in one of the apartment's bathrooms while threatening to throw a grenade inside if any of them decided to wisen up. For a brief second, one of the robbers looks right into an elevator camera before spray painting it. Close up on the guy's face. I think you can imagine whose face I was looking at. Edit. He was identified but never caught. Managed to stay on the run for maybe a year and a half, and was later ended over some drug-related debt. I feel like this is probably a lot harder than just knowing they got off while guilty. Knowing they went on to reoffend in a much, much worse way when the first one was already really bad. For what it's worth, OP, you were just doing your job. Unfortunately, I know it's probably hard to not feel responsible in some way for this, though. Story 3. I was in charge of a legal aid office for domestic violence and SA survivors. I had a custody case where the father was very abusive and manipulative, and the mother, my client, had a slew of serious challenges, both as a result of the abuse and just because she lost the lottery. Mental health, physical health, financially, family circumstances, everything. In the jurisdiction where this happened, the judge who was responsible for this case was, to put it bluntly, an abuser. The judge's ways of addressing DV issues, unless they fit into a very narrow band of cases, was to abuse the victims in court until they went away. So, because I'd been around the block a few times with this judge by this point, I had an ethical responsibility to prepare my client for what would happen if we filed a custody petition to go for what she wanted. Not to try to convince her what she should do, but just to be sure that she understood when she decided what she wanted to do, what to expect. Awful conversation to have, because a few things would almost certainly be true. The father would lawyer up aggressively and start making everything even more of a living hell ASAP. It would go to trial, and every single tiny issue she had struggled with would be aired out in court, putting her in the worst possible light, and she would be hectored and bullied and browbeaten by the husband's lawyer and by the judge. She's a terrible mother. She was a terrible wife. Dad finally couldn't carry her anymore, so she made up abuse to get him back. She doesn't work. She can't provide for herself, let alone the child. She's crazy. She's lazy. Her family doesn't even believe her. Just the worst, most sordid perspective on anything, and the judge would eat it up. The morally challenging part wasn't like, should I do what I can to help this person? It was, what would actually be helpful here? If I strongly suspect that going through this process will be extremely harmful to her for little or no material gain, but I also believe that I'm good at my job and want her to know I'll go in there and go ham on her behalf. It's tough. Every client wants to know whether they can get what they want, but lots of clients, especially in a DV setting, don't really have any sense of what is okay or fair to expect or want. Either consciously or subconsciously, lots of people are looking for a lawyer to tell them what they should do, because it's complicated and it's hard to make that call. For that reason, a lot of lawyers become comfortable saying, "No, I understand, but you don't want to do that because blah blah blah," or "Yes, we should immediately blah blah blah," effectively making the decision for the client. But that wasn't my approach, and that kind of thinking really shouldn't be, in my opinion, anywhere near people who have experienced violence. So it sucked trying to prepare a client to be able to make her own decision in an informed way when I knew with certainty that litigating the case would be opening the door to all kinds of abuse. Story 4. When I was about to start college back in the 90s, I took a legal receptionist job in a legal defense firm in my little southern town. I would work answering the phones until 1 p.m., and then after that I would tag along with one of the lawyers for a few unpaid hours and watch them do their jobs in court. Everyone was very nice and did me a huge favor because the experience gave me enough information to learn that being a lawyer was not for me. It turns out I can't handle watching people be crushed by the system. I could handle the murder trials, drug charges, and real estate squabbling no problem. It was watching poor people get ground up over minor offenses or simple mistakes, little things that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. One case stood out to me in particular. There was a shooting, and a crowd had gathered around the body. A detective was asking people in the crowd if they had seen anything. Our defendant said yes, when he hadn't really seen anything, but he just wanted to help. He was a simple-minded person, but never formally diagnosed with anything, largely due to the lack of services in my town, and the fact he dropped out of school early. When I met him, it was clear that he was a sweet person who really liked people, but was dealing with a low IQ and some reasoning issues. The detective separated our defendant from the crowd and started questioning him. After a few minutes, it was clear that the defendant was just giving answers that he thought the detective would want to hear. He really wanted to make the detective happy. Instead of just dismissing the guy, the detective arrested him for giving false information. He had a few minor thefts on his record. Again, he had reasoning issues, so he was really looking at serious jail time because he had talked to the police. Again, this dude just liked talking to people and didn't know better. He had no diagnosis or health records to back up any claim of mental deficiencies, and anything resembling that would cost money that he didn't have, or time in a state mental facility. He lived with a relative who was equally as broke. His lawyer was contemplating a guilty plea because he'd lied directly to a police officer and admitted it. I left before the case got resolved, but it's the one I still think about. This guy was largely harmless, and was likely going to spend at least some time in serious jail, where the outcome would likely have been very bad for him. The thing that stuck with me was how unnecessary it all was. It was suffering for literally no purpose. Putting him in jail was not going to magically give that guy better cognitive skills other than making him distrust people. For the reasons that OP is saying, I also think I could not really be a lawyer. Watching people who are already beaten and down get more beaten and down by a system in place that is supposed to help people, I simply couldn't stand it. Not every day. Story 5. Going to get downvoted to crap for this because of who we were hired to defend, but one of my coworkers, fellow attorney, was hired by a man in possession of child content to defend him. The guy allegedly used to work for the police, FBI, or whoever to catch people in possession of it and trace it back to the source to try to catch the people making it. However, when he retired, he decided he wanted to keep doing it as a vigilante, allegedly. I have no idea if he actually turned anything he found into the police. He got caught when he took his computer in for service at a local shop. We all had big, bad feels about this case, to be honest. We all fully believed his story did not add up, and thought he was going to jail, but he hired us, so we had to throw something at the wall at least. I don't know how the case ended since I quit the firm before the case went to trial, but I came home sick to my stomach every day while I worked on that defense. Story 6. I don't typically do family law, but I have a case where we suspected the mother had Munchausen by proxy, which if you've seen the Hulu movie Gypsy, you know how messed up it is. The child was always fine with the dad, but mom would take the child to the doctor every other day. When they didn't give the answer mom wanted, she would get a second or third, etc. opinion. Mom was oddly close to the nurses and doctors. Child had some type of cancer where child needed a colostomy bag and mom didn't clean it. It was infected so bad the child can't wear it anymore, and the child is getting more sick and dying. Mom allegedly pushed her child in the shower and it messed up their head. It's possible mom is feeding her drugs too because child puked blood from time to time. Now the child has seizures once a week from the shower incident. Mom spent $400,000 on medical bills in 1 year. She made a fraudulent GoFundMe and only used $200 of the thousands received on medical bills. The page has since been removed, and the case is still open until we can find more experts to testify. Story 7. I'm an immigration lawyer, so the worst I see are people trying to pass off fraudulent marriages for green cards or bogus asylum cases. Years ago, I was a junior attorney at a firm and handled a removal of conditions on permanent residency case. If you marry someone and sponsor them for a green card, if you've been married less than 2 years, the first green card is conditional and for 2 years. You have to file additional paperwork in order to get a normal 10-year green card. This is designed to help weed out fraudulent cases. So my boss hands me a removal of conditions case. I meet the husband, South American, tanned in Midwest winter, soap opera star handsome, totally fit, dressed in expensive clothes, and dripping with gold jewelry. I put together the paperwork and he and the wife come in separately to sign off. She's about 15 years older than him, short, dumpy, homely, dressed in old, frumpy clothes. She tells me that, quote, in his culture, couples don't kiss and don't bang unless they want to have children, and he's not ready to be a father yet. Because of his work, he mostly stays in a coworker's spare room on the other side of the city. She gives me photos of them together as proof of their marriage. A bunch are from his most recent birthday. It's in a club. She's the only woman in the photos. All the other guys are shirtless. Most have glitter on their bodies. I ask a fellow attorney who is gay what he thinks. He recognizes the club as a gay bar he's been to. We'd still filed it without the club photos, and he got his regular green card. This one is strangely challenging, actually, because I feel really bad for the woman if she believes it's real. Maybe there's a chance that she's in on it and was just really selling it well, but also probably not. Story 8. MLMs are considered pyramid schemes in my country, and both are banned in order to protect consumers. It's a crime to establish an MLM. Public prosecution here got wind of an MLM operating and shut it down, closing up the premises and everything. My firm was hired by the MLM to defend their case and establish to the public prosecution that they should be able to continue to operate. I had to prep all the defenses while absolutely despising MLMs and thinking they're run and operated by predatory pieces of crap. We had several high-up employees from the MLM's head office in the U.S. fly halfway across the world to us multiple times for status update meetings. They lasted 15 to 30 minutes or so, but they literally could have been done over email or conference call. Nope, they just had so much money to burn off the backs of vulnerable people who have zero chance of succeeding in their business that a gang of them would fly over every so often and ask, "So, how's it going?" I thanked my lucky stars every time the public prosecution rejected one of our arguments, and eventually the MLM gave up and cleared out of the country. Never been so happy my arguments were unsuccessful. Story 9. I worked 7 months at a criminal defense firm while I was at university. 2 cases stayed with me, and are reasons I will never practice in criminal law. The first was a teenage boy who, egged on by his friends, abused his 5-year-old brother while filming. The client came in with his parents and showed zero remorse. He didn't care. He was asked how he felt about it, and he said he didn't know. The real kicker to me was the 5-year-old was in the lobby outside while they interviewed, and they were all still in the same house. The client was given some offender classes and let go. Mitigating factors were considered in his sentencing that meant he was barely punished. The next was what I feel to be a huge miscarriage of justice. An adult male committed horrific domestic violence, strangling his partner, throwing her through a shower screen, beating her, and the woman's child heard this and called police because she was in no state to do anything. Turns out this is the second woman he had done the exact same thing to. The first time he received court-ordered anger management and domestic violence classes. This time he received the same and a suspended sentence. The client was so blasé about it. He was advised he might go to jail and should get his affairs in order. He ignored that and laughed in his solicitor's face while his father, who was paying his legal fees, hung his head. He didn't know what to do. I don't know why the client didn't go to jail. An act of God meant the female prosecutor didn't ask for a custodial sentence. Story 10. I am not a lawyer, but the guy who got the crap end of the stick. A couple of years ago, my grandpa passed, and transfer on death deeded his house to my mom. A couple of months ago, my mom died, and TOD the home to me. Yay me, right? Well, problem is that Medicaid has what's called estate recovery, which applies for any medical costs incurred between the ages of 55 and 65, or nursing homes at any age. estate recovery takes whatever property you own, and my mom was diagnosed with cancer when she was 60. Grandpa died when my mom was 63. Since she was dying soon, she didn't want the house, had no need for it or the means to upkeep it, but Medicaid also had rules against declining gifts and transferring assets. Because she had cancer, she was left with no choice except to accept the house. She didn't want it because she had cancer. While I agree with the morality of both estate recovery and transfer rules, in her case they literally took away her right to choose because she had cancer, which seems more than immoral to me. Now, because my mom had brain cancer, I have to deal with the legal ramifications of the situation. I did nothing, much less anything wrong, yet I have to navigate a legal tightrope, which has the potential to end very poorly for me and my family, and will at the least cost me thousands, all because my mom had cancer at the wrong age and my grandpa died at the wrong time. Story 11. This was in law school. I did the juvenile defense clinic, meaning I spent about 4 to 6 hours a week in a courthouse doing what was essentially bail hearings for juveniles. They'd been arrested the day before and were in front of a judge for the first time. The trial was pending sometime in the future, and in the meantime they'd either be released with house arrest and phone check-ins, released on house arrest via electric monitoring, or placed in a juvenile facility. The general rule, with more or less no exception, was that any crime in which a gun was involved meant the kid was going to a facility. Nearly anything else was up for argument. Much of my work was talking to parents, siblings, teachers, the kids themselves, and finding out what made them good, then using these points to get something that wouldn't screw them up too much. For example, kids in the facility would miss school, so if a kid potentially had college in his future, you did whatever it took to keep him on track for graduation. Anyway, one Friday I get my list of cases. One 16-year-old kid was accused of going to an under-18 nightclub with a buddy. All allegedly, they were on the dance floor hitting on various girls. His buddy took a liking to one girl, but she wasn't reciprocating. The buddy was getting aggressive, but the girl wasn't having it. So my client got the girl's attention and lifted his shirt. He had a pistol tucked into his waistband. He led the girl to the side entrance and into the alley next to the club. There, at gunpoint, him and his friend assaulted the girl. So in the charges, you had SA and you had a gun. This kid was not going home under any circumstances. I went to talk to the kid and he wouldn't say a word, just sized me up. He had shark's eyes, predator eyes, no humanity behind them, just staring, glaring. I've known others like him, guys that just look at people as things to be used. There were no parents there. They didn't want to come to support him. No friends, no teachers willing to speak to me on his behalf. Everyone seemed to prefer that he was somewhere he couldn't hurt anyone. In these procedures, the prosecutor goes first. He lists the charges, makes his claims. SA at gunpoint. When it was my turn, I say something along the lines of, "The defense has no counter-argument," and rests. Kid goes to juvenile pending trial. I'd love to make this an r/that happened thing and say everyone started applauding, but no, it moved to the next case. My professor came up to me after, though, and told me he was very proud of me, that there was no chance anything else happened. The charges were horrific, and defending someone like that is unpleasant. However, he reminded me that once I pass the bar, I could be disbarred for doing that. I have to do what's in my client's best interests, not my own moral best interests, which is true, and why I'm not an attorney despite passing the bar. Not a way I would like to live. Story 12. My answer is a bit different, since I've thankfully never had a truly morally challenging case. Sure, there's been some injury defense cases or cases where someone got screwed by a deal, but we always recommended the client or their insurance to pay up and not drag it out. The most challenging was this case where a man was sick with cancer and sued every possible product he encountered. This is very typical in product liability cases. Plaintiffs will cast a wide net, and then over the course of discovery you narrow down to a list of handful of... This is very typical in product liability cases. Plaintiffs will cast a wide net, and then, over the course of discovery, you narrow down to a list of a handful of likely suspects. My client, thankfully, was highly unlikely for reasons I won't elaborate upon for obvious reasons. The morally challenging moment came when I was chatting with my boss one afternoon about scheduling depositions, discussing how plaintiff clearly lied about XYZ because of ABC, and joking around about something unrelated when our phones both buzz at the same time. We both got an email. Plaintiff has died, and his attorney and family were going to refile as a wrongful death case. There was a beat where we just stood there in silence before my boss gave me instructions for advising the client while he made phone calls to the other party's counsel. That moment hit me hard over time. Not because I thought my client had anything to do with the disease, I genuinely believe it didn't. Rather, it was a combination of two things. First, it was the first time someone I actually met at deposition in the course of work died mid-case. Usually in my cases, someone would either already be dead or just have injuries they recovered from. Second, it was the fact that by necessity, we only had a moment to take in plaintiff's death before treating it like a litigation event to deal with. A few months later, I left that practice area behind for business dispute litigation instead. Story 13. I was fresh out of uni, and the office I worked at had this potential client who was getting charged with assaulting his daughter, minor at the time of the alleged act. This man cried in front of us, denying it, saying his ex-wife was conspiring against him, alienating his daughter and pressing false charges. At the time, I was dumb. I was very, very dumb. I had just finished reading a biography of one of our ex-minister of justice, in which he told the story of a very similar case, a mother making false claims of assault against the father, and even forcing the kids to lie about it. So I voted yes to accept the client, and we did. We made the defense and claimed not guilty, of course. The client, who was an old man, by the way, assured us he was innocent, and the facts had happened some years prior, so no DNA, no video or photo, nothing. Just witness and the victim. Court date goes on. The victim was called to testify. She was 20 years old and was testifying without the knowledge her father was there outside the room. My colleague decided to confront her about it and ask if she would be able to look in her father's eyes, who was standing out there, and repeat what she was saying. This girl started to immediately cry and shake at the mere thought of facing her father, repeating frantically that she wanted nothing to do with that monster. I felt like a monster too. I felt wrong. And worse, mine was the vote that made us accept that man as our client. So in a way, it was my fault that we were in that situation. I know that we're supposed to defend wrong people, and as an intern I've had my share of scum, cargo robbers, drug dealers, a murderer, but that felt way, way worse. To this day, I've never accepted another intimate crime case. Not that he got many after that. Coming to terms with the fact that you made a mistake is hard. In a situation like that, I can't even imagine. My heart goes out to the victim, and OP didn't tell us how it ended, so we can just say that the man was guilty and went away for a long, long time. Anyway, that's the last story for today. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.